Excuse my kitchen furniture in my living room.
Hey,
Just-
Jerry, you're the invisible man.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with this. This is
Your
weird.
your virtual background, you got to shut it off.
It's not virtual. That's my apartment.
Oh, wow.
Pretty awesome. You're like a Marvel superhero.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
Very
it's kind of
cool.
like leftover from WandaVision last night.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
There we go.
It's
All
definitely
right.
my apartment.
Woof.
That's
Okay,
funny.
cool.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third budget session. Pursuant to Section 5, Chapter 231, Public Laws in 1975, this is to state for the record adequate notice that this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board of the municipal building, by mailing annual notice of regular meetings for 2021 to the news record and Star Ledger December 2020, and by filing said notice in the office of the township clerk.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Liz.
Morning, Liz.
Ms. Adams,
I just said good morning. I'm obviously here.
I see you.
I see you.
Mr. Daffis,
Here.
Mr. DeLuca,
Here.
Mr. Lambrick,
Here.
Mayor McGeehee.
Here.
Whereas Chapter 231, Public Laws of 1975, commonly known as the Open Public Meetings Act, requires that all meetings of public bodies be open to the public. And whereas Section 7A provides that the governing body has the discretion to permit, prohibit, or regulate the active participation of the public at any meeting. And whereas desire the governing body to comply with the provision of this act, same time to conduct its business in an orderly and expeditious manner, now therefore be resolved by the Township Committee, Township Maplewood, does hereby prohibit, except as set forth in the formal agenda, active participation in the deliberations of the governing body by the public, except as otherwise described by law, does limit the public to the observations of the actions and discussions of the governing body at all of its regular and special meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Daffis?
Yes.
Mr. DeLuca?
Yes.
Mr. Lembrick?
Yes.
Mayor McGeehee?
Yes, and good morning and welcome everyone to our third budget session here. I will quickly share my screen my computer, now my laptop works. Here is our agenda for this morning. We're going to discuss capital. We will share a sheet that will show everyone all the capital that's been requested across all the departments. After the discussion, we'll have a revenue discussion will be led by Mr. Koloje, leveraging our master workbook. And then after that discussion, our third and final discussion for this morning will be a recap and recommendations. This will be steered off information that was provided to us by Mr. Schuster and Mr. Koloje, kind of snapshot of what options we have based on the conversations we've had so far in the last two budget sessions. And please note that we're not going to solve everything today. As traditionally things have it, is that we continue to have conversations during our TC meetings as well as a finance committee, and it's ongoing. So we do have some time. This is just really the initial preliminary discussions to really start to frame what our budget will look like. So with that, I will minimize this and we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll start discussing our capital. Move this out the way here. Okay, so I'd like to open up the floor to my colleagues. As discussed, these are all the capital projects that have been requested by department. We do have the tabs in our information, and also Mr. Michalowski has the information as well. So Glenn can pull it up if you want to. So I open the floor to any particular capital project which we want to discuss and do a deeper dive in.
Mr. Mayor, I have a few questions. I think they'll probably be quick. If I can start.
Yes, please.
For under engineering 21-13, Village Center parking lot reconstruction, we may have already gone over this, but which parking lot or parking lots will that be for?
It's the parking lot behind, it's the Village Center lot. So it's the parking lot behind Arturo's.
Oh, okay. So the one from, that basically runs from like
Baker, from Baker to Village Coffee.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and that's an estimate. That's not like, we don't have a a definitive number yet. That's just an estimate.
I understand. And actually, the other one is actually answered in the comments. So yeah, that's all the questions I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lundberg. Ms. Adams, Mr. DeLuca, Mr. Daffis. I can make it bigger. I see some squinting.
Just a little bit. Thank you.
There you go. Sorry about that. Oh, by the way, I didn't want to hide this column, but obviously this is the baseline. This is what we're looking at. Do not look at, I mean, if everybody's comfortable, I could minimize this column, but this is where this is our baseline. We're starting here. So this, like, all this is like, you know, it's not even relevant. This is where we're starting. So case in point for, this is an example of something. So like this number here for, oops, sorry, for 2021-10, where you see this number here, it's not no longer here. We're starting here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So knowing that, the floor is open for any other questions. They also did a percent breakdown, and I mean, it's still traditional, historical. The bulk of the capital is, you know, engineer related, with DPW a distant second, and then our other respective departments as noted. So floor is still open for comments and thoughts.
So, Mayor, what you have 20-02 highlighted in red, is that what's your reason?
I did actually offer your comments, Ms. Adams, a couple of weeks ago. This is the one where the chief had presented the 911 platform and like all the fancy things that it could do, and you had some comments, and so I remember that when I was doing the spreadsheet, and that's why I highlighted it red. So if you don't, no worries, but that's why I did it red.
Oh no, I just thought maybe there was something I was missing.
So. Oh no, and I'll make it black. It was the one thing that I was thinking about, because that was the one that stood out.
Yeah.
So
I'm still not convinced we need to do it this year, and given how tight our budget year is, that would personally be one I wouldn't want to support yet. If we're talking at all, that specifically.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oops.
Mr. DeLuca has his hand up.
Sorry, all these screens. I don't see let me get my participant, Mr. DeLuca.
Right. So I have a question of Mr. Kaloje. How much debt are we retiring this year?
The amount of debt that would be retired this year would be what we budget for in the bond payments. So somewhere around 5.6 million, if I get to that tab.
Okay, still above. I don't have, okay, got it. Is it on here? Do I have this on my, Mr. Closey, do I have a tab that shows that?
No, it would be on our master budget document. I'm
Okay.
looking that up right now for us.
I have
Debt
that
service.
somewhere too. Hold on.
So we have $5.1 million that we are retiring on the bond, $250,000 on the notes. So that's going to bring us to roughly $5.4 million.
I think I have you here, right, Mr. Closey, or am I wrong?
Yep.
That would be the correct tab, yes.
Okay, sorry. I'll try to make it bigger for everyone as well. I'm like the financial Vanna White here. Okay, there we go. Mr. DeLuca, does that address your question?
Yeah, so going back to the bond, going back to the capital, we're roughly replacing dollar for dollar everything we're retiring. Is that correct?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. So can you put back up the, thank you. And then I think the other thing is any dollar we cut here, we're only saving 5 cents in our budget. So to take out something, you know, every $1 million we save $20,000 in our operating budget. So it's not a one-for-one reduction. I do have a question though. What Mr. Daffis said about the estimate for 2113 Village Center parking lot. Now this came out of our visioning program with the Department of Community Affairs. And both Mr. Daffis and I walked that lot. And I have to tell you, I am hard pressed to understand how we are going to spend $350,000 there. And my concern is that this is a huge number, and I don't think that the improvements that we're talking about are going to reach this. And I would hate to craft a program that tries to spend all this money. I just think it's way too high. So that would be number one. Number two, in 2110, traffic calming various locations. It was proposed at 464. It's now 164. So 300,000 was cut out. There's nothing in the comments. I don't know if Mr. Schuster has information as to what was cut out.
I don't off the top of my head. Glenn, do you have the spreadsheet on that, or the backup information on what specifically we took out?
I definitely do in my email somewhere. If you want to go to the next one while I look at Paul's notes. And
well, my guess is it's the traffic light at Burnett and Tuscan Road, which was about 300,000. But if you could just check that. That's the only other. Those are the two comments that I have. I would keep in the 911 because whether we spend it this year or next year, we have to do it, and we're not going to get that much of a savings by taking it out. And I think we want to stay current with our software up there.
Thank you, Mr. DeLuca.
Ms. Adams has her hand up.
Oh, Ms. Adams.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the Village Center parking lot. I think the reason it's 350,000 is, if I recall correctly, our engineer said that it would have to be practically reconstruction of the lot. And that's a lot of money if they're taking it down. It's not just like paving over potholes. It's reconstruction, I think extending some curbing and changing the parking and conceivably changing the direction of the traffic movement.
That's true. Exactly right. And it also includes redoing the walkway, the New Jersey Transit walkway that runs parallel to the train tracks right there, which would not be our responsibility. That would be New Jersey Transit would have to do that with us. So again, we received a concept the other day, but we haven't gone deeper to do like option A without the sidewalk, option B, just, filling in the potholes, option C, a full reconstruction, et cetera.
So, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the 350 is likely too high indeed. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Daffis, sorry. I was just going to say, so then I think what we need to do is need to go back to the renderings and get some numbers to align with it, the pretty renderings, so that we can kind of know what we're dealing with, I think, at this point, right? Because we're hearing 350 is too high, but what is it? What is the number? Is it 200? Is it, well, what is it?
And Mayor, if I could jump in, I'm not sure you're going to get the number you're looking for in the time that we have. I mean, if we're at a conceptual stage right now with no engineering that's actually done, to get an accurate probable cost is probably not going to happen. We can certainly discuss it further with engineering and try to hone in on something a little tighter, but absent the effort of design and engineering, it's still going to be a educated guess.
That's a fair point. And then, I mean, when do we think this project's going to kick off too? Because is this something we're going to do in 2021, or is this something that's really going to be 2022? By the time the weather starts to get bad, COVID starts to reduce, so people start using the parking lot more. Like, what is the roadmap for this project?
It's still planned for 21. I mean, could it slip into 22? Absolutely. But right now, it's when we talked it over, planned for 21.
All right, so that's when we need to come back and revisit.
I just want to clarify something. I have I can't share it because Mayor, you're sharing yours, but there's a memo from John McCormick, November 5th, that says, based on the cost estimate for D Hart Park, I would start at about $350K. And it says this does not include the New Jersey Transit walkway wall. So $350,000 just to do that parking lot. Again, I just think it's a lot of money. So
Also, I don't know if, I don't remember where we are with the New Jersey Transit Baker Street lot. It feels like that got kind of forgotten about for a while. We were gonna try, there were supposed to be negotiations back when Sonia was here with New Jersey Transit to, so for us to fix it, especially during COVID while it's empty, and work out a financial arrangement with regard to our lease and everything.
Yeah, that's right. So that needs to be revisited with Jerry coming on board. So I think this number, this 350 is going to change. But we need to figure out what we need to kind of go back and get some information and revisit that one. So
Yeah.
I have it flagged here in red as likely, and that being likely a reduction here. So
And maybe that could be also included in the conversation with NJ Transit with regard to that walkway and the Baker Street lot.
Yep.
So Mayor, my comments are outside of the Village Center parking lot, which I think we covered sufficiently. I would agree with keeping the 911 console upgrade in. I think it's important for public safety to have that upgrade done. The narrative was pretty compelling about it being an immediate need. I would be less inclined to approve, excuse me, to approve the purchase of the police vehicles this year. Maybe we can wait until next year for that. And that's all I was going to say about that. Thank you.
okay, did a Forrest Gump on us there.
My voice is.
So okay, so you're saying, all right, potentially pushed. Oops, sorry. This way. Okay, so potentially push now both vehicles or one vehicle, Mr. Daffis, just so I'm clear.
For me, both vehicles.
Okay. Any other discussion in those regarding that? Ms. Adams, Mr. Limbrick, Mr. DeLuca.
And I think we're going to need the 911 system upgrade. I think we're going to need the vehicles. So I think, you know, for me, in terms of something to delay to next year, I think it's just, you know, we would really just be delaying those purchases a year, and there's going to be other vehicles that we may need next year. So for me, given that this, as Mr. DeLuca pointed out, really only saves us 5 cents on the dollar, I wouldn't be inclined to take either of those out myself. I would vote to keep both of those.
Got you. Ms. Adams, Mr. DeLuca, any thoughts on the vehicles as well? I've already just said we're keeping just on our conversations here. We have 3 yeses for the 911, so I left that in. Any thoughts on the police vehicles? We have, you know, having a discussion.
I agree with Mr. Limber.
Okay. That's it. All right, so that's done. All right, any other capital item that we want to cover at this point? And community services down here, by the way. So when you make the screen bigger, some people hide below the fold. A little smaller, just so you have a snapshot of everything.
Just to circle back on 2110, the initial request from Paul was 769, and then after a discussion, it went down to 464. Remove everything except the traffic calming requests, the LEDs, and the signal. I just want to confirm with Paul to make sure it's not a typo, because if we eliminate everything but traffic calming and push buttons, that would bring us to 164.
Okay, so
What are
I'm
the thi-
gonna go ahead, Mr. Lucas. Sorry.
What are the things that he eliminated?
So from the initial request,
Yeah.
so the initial request had, let me just pull it up on the screen for you.
Yeah, I totally rock and roll.
Sorry, I just had a lot of tabs open. I'll get.
I know you do. Excuse me.
While Glenn's doing that, just want to remind everyone that you do have authority during the year to bond. So just because you're putting together the capital budget right now, it doesn't mean that you can't do something extra later on in the year and bond accordingly. The payments would start in 2022, and you'd have to work that into your 22 budget. But I just don't want anyone to think that whatever you're doing right now is locked in stone, and there's no way you could add something to it mid-year. So should something change.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster.
So it was both the intersection of Vermont, Franklin, and the traffic signal at Burnett, Tuscan.
Right. And then when it got, so what got cut out, what got left in is just number 1 and number 2. Yeah, because this was the 464.
Right.
And then this was what was cut out, the traffic at, okay.
So we are down to 164 and we're losing the Burnett Tuscan Road intersection.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'm okay putting that off for a year.
Agreed.
I'm potentially okay with putting that off forever, but that's a whole nother conversation.
One year at a time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. So going
Mayor, if
back,
I just may add to the conversation,
please, Mr. Kaloje.
similar to what Greg had just said, we have the ability to put up, we just amend our capital budget, and then we can put up a bond ordinance at any time during the given year. I just wanted to make the Township Committee aware. I was speaking with Mr. Kittner, I guess it was last week. We've been so busy that every day's been blurring into the next. He had indicated that we have budgeted in our 2020 bond ordinance $200,000 for air conditioning at the Woodland. There are some air exchange issues and some historic building issues that he's anticipating that we're probably going to need to add another $150,000 to that project in order to air condition the Woodland. So I don't know if any memo went out, but I wanted to make everyone aware of the fact that he's pulling some numbers now, and he seems to think that we're going to, in addition to the 200 that we already have earmarked, that we're going to need another 150.
I think that might change again, Joe, because that was a meeting with historic preservation with 2 of the architects on that committee and the architect for the Woodland, that but there's also potential savings with redesigning the air conditioning in the parlor area where we could save substantial amount of money. So it might be a wash, and it's not quite, which is probably why Paul, I think the assignment was for the Woodland architect to go back and relook at everything and relook at where things are located, so that there might be, it was, that kind of thing. So we're not sure that'll go up.
That's good news.
Yeah, I also think we have to do a cost benefit analysis as to, is it worth air conditioning it if it's going to cost us 400,000 as opposed to 200,000?
Right.
Yeah.
We should also look at whether or not we can air condition parts instead of the entire building, but.
Yeah, like the parlor versus the big.
Right.
Totally
Yeah.
agree.
Things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Are there any additional comments on capital? I think to Mr. Schuster and Mr. Cloderj's point that as it stands today as a snapshot, obviously we need more intel on the village parking lot that's redlined. Glenn already did this action item. You already provided that for us, so thank you. But at this point, this is where we stand, and obviously, if need be, we can take this out now theoretically and come back and revisit it later on in the year once we have more intel. But outside of that, is there any additional questions? Mr. Luca, you're
Yeah,
on.
sorry, I was muted. Is it possible you could put up 2101 just to see what we are buying? I know it says remove the vacuum truck, but what are we buying?
Glenn will do that. He has, we're tag team. He has the tabs. 2101, Glenn. Remember we had the vehicles. There's two, top of my head, I think there were two salt trucks, but I can't remember. I don't have it in front of me.
There's a dump truck.
Well,
I don't-
and then there was another sweeper, right? Glenn will pull it up.
Mm.
I want to say it was a sweeper, two trucks.
That was 2 weeks ago. We can't be.
And then was it the other? He pulled out the sidewalk.
Right, that thing that rips it up thing.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of it. I can look
Or
for
the
it.
technical terms for the equipment.
So I can find it as well.
Doohickey.
Doohickey. Voila.
This was his initial request that he brought down based on your recommendations, and then let's see, vehicle equipment. I have it here. So the rock bottom for Paul is 650. That would include a 4-wheel drive large dump body at 210K each, a motorized sweeper, turf blanket, one tractor for plowing sidewalks, a front end loader with accessories, a single axle tilting trailer, and his wish list is for 860 that he can get the second large dump body.
So let's do that. Where is does that equal 7? It looks like that's more than 750, this spitball in my eyes. So where is what was taken off exactly?
And then he took it
For
out.
6 and 7. We're
I
taking.
can't hear you, Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn, you're breaking up big time.
Sorry. Let me pull up his notes.
20 plus 30 plus 140 plus 485 plus
Might be 1 through 5.
one thing and minus the. Thanks, Madison. 595 reduction. It was a 595 reduction. So where'd it go?
Yeah, I have his version 2.0 somewhere over here. I just got it.
Okay, because whatever it was, he took out 595, but I was going to add in that list what it was.
I think Ms. Adams is correct. I think it's 1 through 5.
Is it 1 through 5 to get? I was.
I think so.
Look up.
But let's confirm it.
Yeah, then we can move on. Let's see. Engineering. Download. Open. $21.01. This is old.
Yeah, so that request that you're seeing that I just set up, that is what he reduced from the initial. He just didn't make the change on the total. So that would be 860. And then
Can you pull it back up, Glenn?
yeah, let me pull it up.
Yeah, because I'm a visual kind of person. Thank you.
All right, so let me go to.
All right, so which ones oh, well.
All right,
Perfect.
using equipment here.
Yeah, so just highlight the ones that he took out so I can see.
This is the reduced request, but the total here should be 860. It just wasn't updated. So the initial request that you first saw was the 1.3. And that was the initial request with all these.
That's the initial request, but the new request, which we'll put back up again. So this equals, you're saying that equals 860.
Yes.
It can't.
Cannot, it's too high.
Can't.
That's what I'm saying.
420 and 485 is already
Correct. That's what-
900.
Thank you. That's where I was going. This is inaccurate. There's something that's what, thank you, Vic. That's what I was saying. Like I was trying to. So it's not 850 or 750. It's something's off. This number equal to 1.3. What we're seeing that equal to 1.35, the original number you had. So to get to 750, we had to reduce it by 595. So that list of equipment, 1 through 7, whatever adds up to 955 is what he's trying to get rid of. And I think Nancy said she had spitballed it, and so it was the first 5, and I was going to really quickly do it. So we just need to know what we're looking at.
So I sent you his word for word, the note I got yesterday with the reductions. Was not in the form request. So in your chat, you'll see
What's in the chat?
most recent request from
Right.
Biff.
So yeah, it's a question of whether we buy 2 dump trucks or 1 dump truck. If we buy 2, it's 860. If we buy 1, it's 650.
Okay. So for discussion, why?
Do they make electric dump trucks?
Well, good. Who knows? And maybe if we get to go to league, we can see down in the there's so many trucks down there.
Big
Glenn,
toy.
can you put the list of that 860 up? Or the
Yeah,
last
that'd be
one?
great. I thank you, Mr. Luca. I need to see that list. Then I can pull the numbers from there. Here we go. Leave it up, please. All right. So let me just reset because that's the 1.35. 420 plus 425. Sorry, 225.
The 860 is everything except number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Luca. Okay, so that's it. So basically, he wants everything but the but number 6, and now we're just trying to decide between this other 120 for the. So discussion: do we get 1 dump truck or 2?
Nobody's saying anything.
I know everybody. Maybe you're
I
right.
mean, I would vote for 2 because I mean, this is, I remember during the storm, they did an incredible job with the current equipment. Although there were, they got stuck. The snowplow fell off in a couple of streets. And so, I would support having better equipment for our employees to do the important cleanup job during storms. So absolutely would support 2.
I agree.
We're all on the same page. I just added it back in, by the way. So that's 750. It should have been it's 860. So thank you, Glenn, for putting this up. I appreciate it. Glenn, you can take it down now, and then I'll share my screen again. Thank you, sir. Okay, so that's 860. So I just changed that. You can see from 750 to 860 there, which moved this up a little bit here from 5.3 to 5.4. I'll show you 5.362 to 5.466. Okay, so. All right. Does anyone else have anything else at this time to discuss in regards to capital?
I'll just add that I did get a quote back. You guys had asked me to look into the Zoom integration for the big room. So if you wanted to put that in IT lifecycle, that would be 40,000.
Oh, I don't totally think that's worth it.
So this number here.
Yeah, I would just put it at 45 just because because it was a very rough estimate that he turned around really quick, and there's some things in it that I might want to ask him to revise. So.
And I know we're just talking budget here, but before implementation of something like that, I think you really need to talk about how that's going to work and what potential issues that could create of having a mix of people, both in live meetings and online, both able to participate. So I would just suggest you work through that first and the technology second.
Noted. And actually, and thank you, Mr. That's a fair point. Glenn, are you saying incrementally 45, which will bring it to 55, or are you saying incrementally 35?
Yeah, the 10,000 for our regular IT replacements. That was reduced because we got some CARES funding that took care of some replacements, and then the 45 for the
50. So 55.
Yeah.
Okay. Oops. Thank you. All right. All right. So was that 45 plus 120 That's increments of 165 right there. So maybe we can get this down by 165 and it's a wash. Okay, noted. Any other thoughts, comments? There's one more item we do need to discuss, but I want to make sure we've covered this. Seeing none. Glenn, you want to discuss the lease program?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on it only because once you finalize the capital budget, the lease program's through O&E. So if we don't move forward with it and we need to replace vehicles, we would have to bond for it like we normally do. So I'd sent out the documents. I don't know if you want to have some further discussion or if you have any questions or if we should move forward with putting it for next Tuesday.
Why don't you highlight the benefits of it? I think there's some compelling benefits for the committee.
Sure. I mean, just from a fleet management perspective, they'll provide software to manage the fleet, which we don't currently have and would have to buy if we were doing it internally. If the market's favorable, when we sell them with our government pricing, we take that net equity and apply it back to the lease payment so that can come down over time in the long term. And then the maintenance savings, it's I think $50 a month if we wanted to do maintenance, and I think over time, that's for the cost of a mechanic, that's like 110 vehicles for the year you could pay for the cost of one mechanic long term. But it would be an overtime savings, but there are some benefits to fleet management side, the maintenance savings side, and just cash flow savings. And Joe can expand on it too, because he has experience with the program from his time in Clifton.
So there's cost savings from a cash flow perspective. There's maintenance savings. There is durability savings from an operation perspective. And then also, I thought there was a possibility that we could use hybrid or electric vehicles potentially as well, correct?
Yeah, so the most recent quote I sent out to you guys was for the EV sedan.
Glenn, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you put it up on the screen because you're kind of talking in abstracts and I tried to share mine, but it's not, I can't do it. So I think it would be helpful to have that chart you sent us up.
I can pull it too. If you can't find it, Glenn, I can grab it.
Yeah, I didn't share it, talk about that one, so just give me a chance.
No worries, I think I have it too.
Never mind if somebody lets me share it.
Oh, you need to share here. Sorry, Nancy.
That's all right.
There you go.
This is it, right?
Yeah, that's the one. So Glenn, as Nancy's sharing the document that you provided us, you've mentioned there's savings in efficiency and maintenance and cash flow. Three wins, right? And then also it's more sustainable.
Yeah, and again, if you don't like the pilot, we can always just discontinue the pilot and go back to doing it in our capital budget. And that's discussions that when Jerry comes on Monday, your vision for how we manage the fleet,
So is there any discussion regarding why we should not do this pilot from any of my colleagues?
I think we should do it.
I just would ask about, because we do get money from vehicle, when we sell vehicles we own after we're done using them, right? Or we repurpose them sometimes, like police vehicles, when one's worn out, we give it to, parking or crossing guard or whatever they use it for. So I just feel like we need to know more about that. Like, when do we repurpose? Are we going to be, I'm personally just, but it's very personal level, against leasing cars because I like to own it at the end of the day. But so I don't know if that makes sense on a municipal level like this. So I feel like there's a lot of information here and not sure I have a good handle on what it means year to year, year over year, and what we're not getting because we're leasing.
I think what we can do, Ms. Adams, is that to Glenn's point is we can try it as a pilot for a year or two and get but I also see a lot of benefits in terms of a leasing program, keeping our efficiencies up, keeping our costs down, our maintenance, maintenance, being able to kind of outsource that. That's huge savings. And also a lot of wear and tear on our maintenance team in DPW. I'm on board. I think we should move forward with it, but I'm open to discussion. Mr. Luca, any thoughts?
I would like to move forward with a pilot. I would like to have our new administrator propose exactly what we're going to be leasing, how it impacts the capital budget, how it impacts the operating budget.
Right. And to that point, Glenn, you want to touch on operating capital budget?
There's no impact to capital with this program.
Right. So that's another way.
Well, there's actually a reduction to capital because you're not doing capital purchases anymore.
Correct.
It's done through.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So I don't think we have our answers. If that's the answer we're getting. If we have there a hybrid, I'm sorry, we have an SUV for the fire department. Are we going to buy it or are we going to lease it? If we're going to lease it, then it does impact the capital.
The fire and PD aren't included in this program because I didn't see enough of a benefit with the aftermarket costs involved with those vehicles. That would, again, require further analysis and discussion with the two chiefs to see.
And what about the police cars?
When it started going over 11,000 in aftermarket, it was something the chief didn't want to look into at this time. He wanted more time to kind of dig into it. So
Okay.
we're looking at.
So I don't get, if we're not going to be replacing the new cars we're buying in the capital budget, what are we replacing?
This is for an inspector vehicle that was totaled, and this is for two SUVs for Caesar, who's using the old police chief's SUV right now that the engine went, and Paul, so he has four-wheel drive, and I'm going to rotate his C-Max into the general fleet for an inspector.
But we don't have those on the capital budget. How are we buying those?
They're in the lease program, those three vehicles.
They would, correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, they would have been in the capital budget if not for the lease
Initial
program.
cost for the two SUVs, but they were pulled out and put into the lease program.
Right. So I think what Glenn is saying is that had we not go with this lease program, we need to add more capital to buy those vehicles. That's
No,
what
I understand that. So there is an impact on the capital budget.
Yes, there is an impact.
Okay, thank
100%.
you.
I agree with that too. So Glenn, I think what you're trying to say is by moving forward with this leasing program, there is an impact on the capital budget, which helps reduce our capital expense.
Right, which is why I wanted to bring it up today before you finalize the capital budget.
Because if we don't go this route, we need to add more money to the capital budget, which I'm no longer sharing. Yes, we got you. All right. So with that being said, are we okay with Glenn working with Mr. Gimes and Mr. Schuster, but at least trying to pilot this program for these three vehicles?
Mr. Gimes, do you have experience in this regard? I'm not sure I remember the answer to that.
I mean, we've leased vehicles before from time to time in other towns, so that's not completely new. The main driver in those communities were just to, reduce, in those cases, they were in SUVs. So it was just to reduce the full amount of actually putting that in the operating budget. We did it with regular vehicles that you camp on. So that was the reason we did it. I never really did it with an SUV program or as intense as the program that, Glenn laid out.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Gimes, definitely work with Glenn to get more intel at this point. As Mr. Schuster and Mr. Kaloje said, we can obviously come back, and if we decide for whatever reason not to go to the program, we can add more to the capital. But for now, I think we're in a good place. And we'll hear back from you and Glenn. Just looking at the sheet, which we're not sharing anymore, are there any additional questions, or are we ready to move on to revenue?
Move on.
Moving on. All right. I'm going to yield the floor over to Mr. Kaloje. And Glenn, I think if you can share the master sheet, that would be better than mine, because mine has got a lot of marks and stuff. I don't think it'd be clear. Okay, Mr. Cloje, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure that I'm not stepping on Mr. Schuster's toes. I was under the
Fair,
impression-
whoever, yeah, to that point, Mr. Schuster and Mr. Cloje, you jointly have the floor. Fair.
I mean, you can
First,
go ahead, Joe. It's all right.
Okay. So this is basically our revenue sheet that has been previously submitted to the Township Committee. There are two columns that we have running right now. One, column D, indicates what under normal circumstances we would be able to budget for in any given year. New Jersey state statute requires that you cannot anticipate revenues greater than what you collected the year before, unless, of course, you can document a reason for such an increase. So as an example, we decided to increase the fee that we're charging for summer camp, and then we would be able to send that down to the Trenton and get approval to anticipate more revenue in recreation than we collected the year before, because we would document the ordinance or the resolution that said we're charging higher fees. The second column, which is column E, is basically Chapter 74. Back in August, the legislature put into place a law that would help municipalities survive the pandemic. It was signed into law by the governor, I believe, on August 31st. And it gave several tools to municipalities to be able to deal with the lost revenue that was anticipated in the beginning of the budget process for 2020 and obviously not realized. So one of the tools that we have available to us is that instead of being able to budget for strictly what we brought in as actual revenue in 2020, we now have the ability to take 2019, 2018, and 2017's revenues and to create an average. And we can use that average number to plug into the budget in order to help us balance with expenditures.
So,
And-
Mr. Cloje, can you stop right there? Does everybody understand that? Okay, just making sure. Thank you. That's an important part of the whole narrative you've set up. Thank you.
So what we see in column F under the notes is the difference between actual and Chapter 74. So we're indicating which revenue number we should be plugging in based on that recommendation. So for alcoholic beverages, and it's a relatively insignificant number, we're saying that we would want to use Chapter 74 to utilize, and we can get in a whole $86 more. That obviously becomes more significant as we move down to such things as municipal court. The other element of Chapter 74 in order to help municipalities survive the pandemic is, in addition to being able to change our budget to not using actual numbers, but an average number of the last 3 years or the prior 3 years, is the ability to do a special emergency note and take any kind of loss in both operations or revenue and pay that back over the course of 5 years. So in this particular case, we brought that to the TC back in November, and the TC unanimously agreed that this is a tool we would like to have in our toolkit for a budget in 2021. And we then prepared the appropriate resolution and ordinances in December, which we passed, adopted, sent down to the state for approval. The state had set up the law that said if you don't hear from us in 45 days, it's automatically approved. No surprises, we didn't hear from them, and we made it through. By the end of January, we were now free and clear. I had asked the state to approve far more than we were going to need. We had asked the state for $3.7 million worth of ability to borrow, and they approved that. As it stands right now here and today, we have $240,000 in pandemic costs that were not reimbursed by the CARES Act. We collected our full $886,000 that we were entitled to. We spent over $1 million, and so we have $240,000 that, according to Chapter 74, we would be able to sell a note for and then pay back that $240,000 over the course of 5 years. It should be noted while we're talking about that, because it is an expenditure, is that in the event that the federal government decides that, yes, they are going to move forward and give more aid to municipalities to help us through the pandemic, we would be able to use that money to pay off the full 240 that we borrowed. So in that sense, that borrowing the 240 for the pandemic costs is essentially just a cash flow thing more than anything else. The other thing that Chapter 74 allows us to do is we can borrow against operational losses. And in this particular case, this year in 2020, we ultimately wound up with an operational loss of about $178,000. That was much higher at some point, but we put forth in front of the TC back in December a resolution to cancel appropriations that we did not use because of the pandemic. A good example would be the Jitney was one of the areas we canceled. The library was one of the areas we canceled. I'm trying to think of, there was like four or five rather, that we wound up canceling. But ultimately, the TC canceled $425,000 worth of appropriations that were unused, and that offset our operational loss. So we really lost money in terms of 178 plus the 425, but because of what we did in December, we brought that loss down to the 178. That leads us to our lost revenue. All said and done, I finished the annual financial statement. It's been vetted by our auditors, and I'm prepared to submit it now to the state. We lost $1.8 million in anticipated miscellaneous revenue. And Chapter 74 gives us the ability to borrow that full $1.8 million that we did not realize in the 2020 budget in order to help us offset the costs of the 2021 budget. It is a special emergency note, just as the pandemic expenses are, and it would be paid back over the course of 5 years. So that's essentially where we're looking at in terms of budget revenues. You can see if we kind of scroll up and down that there are some areas where we're recommending we use the actual, and there are some revenue line items that we're recommending we use to Chapter 74. It would likewise be my recommendation that we move forward with selling a special emergency note once we have a budget in place, so that we can appropriately handle our cash needs throughout 2021.
I'm sorry, Joe, did you touch at all on the anticipated surplus and the change there?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Greg. It's good.
Sorry to highlight the bad news, but
no. I'm glad someone's paying attention to what I'm doing so that you can catch my mistakes. The other item that we need to look at, and it is highlighted, the surplus anticipated. Now that the annual financial statement is completed, and it all ties into the discussions that, or the explanation I just gave regarding our revenue loss. We initially had anticipated $1.2 million in the 2021 budget. We started the year at $1.7 million. We used up immediately $1.2 million to balance our budget, and that put us at $500,000 in terms of what we had going into a pandemic. And then the pandemic, of course, hit. When we wound up canceling what we had available to us with the 425, and we take into account the loss that we had, which was a little over $600,000, all said and done, our ability to use surplus in this 2021 budget has been significantly reduced from 900,000 to roughly 382,000 if you wanted to spend every single penny in all our checking accounts, which is something that I wouldn't recommend doing. But it does highlight the need for us to take advantage of the ability to sell a special emergency note, because at this point in time, we walked into 2020 with $1.7 million worth of cash flow to help us meet our bills, pay the school district, and everything else that goes along with a budget during the year. Our cushion now is only $382,000 in all of our accounts. And so it's going to be important that we replenish that at some point in time so that we don't run into the issue of not being able to make payroll, or not being able to send the county their quarterly taxes, or not being able to move money into the open space fund, as we go through the year and collect 4 times out of the year. But I think that Mr. Schuster's pointing out here, this budget that we originally proposed to you was balanced based on using $900,000. and we now have a $600,000 hole that we're going to need to plug before we can introduce a budget.
Thank you, Mr. Kaloje. So are there any questions about what he was saying regarding the 1.7 hole, the 1.2, right? We left us with 5 plus the 4 we got from basically the appropriations, brought us to 9. Then basically we had a hole of 6. We ended up with 3 in our surplus. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's where we are, for whatever it's worth. I know that we were provided with some documents regarding 2 scenarios. The narrative was to continue business as usual, which we did in 2020. And then the other scenario was just to reduce appropriations now in the budget at somewhat of a risk, depending on how you look at it, where if the economy bounces back, then we won't be able to have, a full vetted summer program for kids in rec, as an example, and the other 3 options as well. So I think really understanding where we are from a revenue perspective, and looking at it on the other sheet that was shared, and if you have your sheet open too, what are the initial thoughts of the committee about how we should move forward? And we don't have to finalize this today. So it's just to get some direction, because the finance committee will meet for the next, 2-3 months, multiple times. We'll talk about this at almost every TC meeting. What is the temperature of the township committee regarding which directive to go for 2021?
I'm sorry, I missed, I had a couple of questions on the spreadsheet. I thought we were going to go through some of those others.
And we will go through them as well. I think they align. I think what we're talking about flows right into the direction. But if you have your questions, Mr. Luke, why don't we start with your questions, then we can go from there. So please go ahead.
Sorry, I sort of missed it. On 123-101, sewer service fees. We
Line 25, row 25, yeah.
Line 27. In 2020, we had anticipated $2.9 million. Actual was 2.4. Is that correct, Mr. Kaloje?
Yes, sir.
And why did we anticipate so much more from the year before?
It looks like there was an accounting error in this particular line item that basically double counted the refund that we get from the joint meeting.
So you're saying that was in 2020?
Correct.
Okay. And does the 2021 include a refund from the joint meeting?
No, but it does include an additional $20 as a sewer fee.
Right. Do we account for that refund in this yet?
Yes, the refund is counted lower down in this budget sheet. Should be down near section F or G.
I don't know who's controlling the page.
Not me.
Lennis.
Sorry, I was just responding to one of the panelists. All right. Where are we going, Joe?
So we're going to scroll all the way down to section G. It'll be one of the last sections for us, so we can go pretty quick. Grants are F, G, so it's going to be H actually. So line 86 would show the
Okay, got it.
sewer
Okay.
assessment.
And that also went down.
Well, we had gotten a little more money, and that's where we wound up with the accounting error from last year.
Okay.
But we had gotten a little more money from a refund last year, and the joint meeting made it very clear, hey, don't expect to see this again next year. It's just that we got a little extra to help everybody with this year.
Okay. And the other question I have is, we are on the 16th going to be finalizing a marijuana tax, a 2% marijuana tax. How would we account for that as a revenue for this year's budget?
So for this year's, if if we know that we're going to do this, we can do it one of two ways. If we had already had an adopted budget, we would have to do it as a chapter 159 this year in order to roll it in. And then in the following year, it would become a regular normal line item for us. But if we're going to wind up adopting this, we can, and we're going to need to send this down to the state to get approval anyway. We can include this as a new line item in revenue this year, similar to when we bring a pilot on board in any given year.
And how would we calculate the potential of what the revenue would be? So for
My
every $1 million
understanding of the law
of gross
is-
sales,
My understanding of the law is it's 2% of gross revenue for the
Right.
facility. So we would need to speak to the facility to understand what they believe they're going to have as gross revenue for the year. I would suggest, assuming that that's an optimistic guess, and reduce that number a little bit and then multiply it by the 2% and plug that into our budget.
okay, because in my conversations, they expect around 600 to 700 when they open, and then up to $1 million when they get going. So that's about 20,000 a month once they get going.
That's before recreational, right?
Correct. That's just
Because
medical
that'll-
marijuana.
Right, so it'll
And that's,
definitely go up.
that's annual? I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say it's something that'll keep going up once recreational.
Yeah, in 2022. Ugh.
I'm sorry, Joe, you asked the question?
So I'm assuming those numbers that you said are annual sales, their annual gross sales?
Those are monthly gross sales, $1 million a
Monthly
month.
gross sales?
Yeah,
Okay, so I mean, if we conservatively take $600,000 and we multiply that by their opening in April, so let's just start in May and call it 8 months worth of gross revenue, and then multiply that by 2%, that would be $96,000 to our budget.
right. And maybe we should just shrink that a little bit, but I think we should include something in there for this year.
Yep,
Agreed. When do they plan to open again?
April 20th.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sorry, I forgot, that was stupid.
probably more towards May. And Joe, I have another question. Do we account anywhere in here of any kind of cancel capital appropriations? Or do we have any that can be canceled?
Capital appropriations, if you can expand on that, I'm not really sure.
So, money that we have left over, capital reserve fund. So money we have left over, do we
That
cancel
is
any?
not plugged in here yet. Right, so it's not plugged in. It's not plugged in here yet. Those are still part of. If we look at this section, I've got 2 highlighted as estimates. The capital and due from general capital would be one of those estimates. So we don't have a firm. There will be something. We just don't have a firm number yet. I'm going to have a discussion with the auditors next week about that.
So
And to
you're
that
estimating 200,000.
Right.
Okay.
And to that point about having reserves in terms of capital, I see a number here, an actual 178 on line 82. Is that the first year? I'm also seeing it zeroed out for all the previous. Is that the first time that's ever happened, Mr. Kaloja?
No, it's a transitional thing on the way that the general capital fund operates. In any given year, there winds up being surplus as we retire debt or as we sell notes. Typically, what will wind up happening is when I let you know that we've got an interest rate that came in at 0.5%, they may look to sell the note itself at 1.5%. And so essentially what they'll do is they'll give us a premium in order to reduce the number down to a net interest cost of 0.5%. That money then winds up sitting in the general capital fund, which is able to be utilized as a revenue source if we so choose.
Understood. Thank you.
Historically, we've chosen to do so.
Any additional questions for Mr. Kaloja in regards to revenue line items? Let me see. Anybody raising their hand? No.
Glenn, can you just scroll up? Thank you.
He just resent this also, everyone, because the one I was using was from the previous week, and so this one had been updated a little bit.
Yeah, so the only real change from what you were using, Mayor, and what was sent out earlier is that there's the 4 line items that from the last work session a week ago that were identified as we are anticipating revenue that is higher than what we were anticipating from, or lower than what we were anticipating the year before, higher than what we actually collected, but the appropriation side was remaining flat. And so there were 4 areas that recreation was what brought up the conversation, cultural affairs. Then we took a look at any department that we can directly attribute revenue to, and that department from the appropriation side. And all we did was highlight where those differences wound up being in red, so that it stood out a little bit easier.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Kaloje.
Could you go up to the cable television?
What line is that one?
We're there now. It's line 28.
28, thank you.
So why is this being reduced? Because, I mean, it's not that much money, but it looks like it should be on par with previous years.
You're going to see a continued reduction every single year as people cut cable and go direct internet.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I did. The smart TVs, the Roku TVs, yeah, it's cable's dying.
That's what I did.
Yep, Fios is dying, Comcast is dying.
How will they watch us in the future?
Oh, apps on your smart TV.
YouTube. Zoom.
Yep. So. Any additional questions for Mr. Kaloje?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeLuca. Ms. Adams, Mr.
I
Lambert.
just have a question. Can you scroll? Oh, is parking meters our parking permits? Because we don't have any meters.
It's an old term that's used by the state. Our problem is right now, and one of my goals since I got here was to start to clean up our general ledger so that it would feed and provide us with more accurate data. But right now, rolled into parking meters is jitney passes, parking permits,
Right.
overnight parking permits. The school district rents parking spaces from us. There's a whole host of stuff that's just dropped into one big bucket that
Right.
doesn't really give us the ability to track anything.
So it feels like we're overestimating revenue for there. Or is
So we are utilizing the Chapter 74 in order to balance this budget, correct?
right.
Doesn't that also include the parking meters at the train station?
Yes.
2 of those, and then there's 2 EV charging meters at the Woodland.
Right.
It's one giant bucket that we're going to need to figure out how to untangle, and then we're going to need to figure out how to set up our turnover sheets in order to be able to track the revenue from all these different sources and different places. And part of the problem right now is they've been going through different departments in order to get this stuff in place, and we've begun the consolidation to get it into one spot, so that from there we can then carve it up and say, this is what we're getting for the combo passes, this is what we're getting for the parking passes, and we'll have a better handle on how we're bringing in revenue starting in 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Kaloje. Ms. Adams, any additional questions for revenue line items?
I don't think so.
Thank you. Mr. Limbrick, Mr. Daffis, any questions? Just say no or yes, because I can't see your faces, please.
No.
I'm good, Mayor, thanks.
I do have, I'm sorry, one more question.
Mr.
The Senate, United States Senate is now going to be voting on this American Rescue Bill. We've got an indication that Maplewood is supposed to get $4.6 million. How would that impact the revenue here, Mr. Kaloje?
I'm unclear as to what we would be able to use the $4.6 million for, but obviously if it's to bridge pandemic losses, we would be able to utilize it I would assume the first thing we would do is pay off any notes that we wound up borrowing to get us out of any debt that we created. And then from there, we would utilize whatever the balance was in order to strengthen some of the programs that we wanted to do, or to use it towards capital projects. Like I said, I'm unclear as to what strings are going to be attached to that money. But once we have an understanding of that, we would figure out and make recommendations to you.
So, Glenn, can you scroll up on this? So the 5-year emergency notes that we have, the $2.2 million, are you saying that we would be able to pay that off?
I'm assuming that would be one of the reasons that the federal government would be giving money to municipalities. Yes, that they would be able to say, all right, if this was your revenue losses because of the pandemic, this was your operating losses because of the pandemic, these were your additional expenses because of the pandemic, we're gonna send you this money to address those pandemic needs. And if that is the case, then yes, we would be able to take the money that's coming from the federal government and pay off the note.
Right. So your recommendation to us, Mr. Kaloje, is that if allocated this funding, that our priority first should be the notes, and then subsequently address operating expenses deficiencies.
Once I have the opportunity to take a look at, like I said, the strings that are attached to it, because the truth is we do a note and we're now stretching that out over a payment of 5 years. The TC may decide that we've got a better place to spend $4.6 million than addressing, paying back $400,000 a year.
Right.
So given that, obviously it's going to be a policy decision to make, but yes, we would take a look at all the possible outcomes that we can go with based on $4.6 million coming from the government. And we would give you guys a menu of here's what we can do, here's what we're recommending you can do, and obviously answer any questions and do any research that you had in order to make an informed decision.
Yeah, that's fair, Mr. DeLuca. Let's not have Mr. Kaloje speculate. Let him get an opportunity to kind of figure out what the strings are attached and then come back to us. Any other questions regarding revenue line items? If not, let's segment into the next phase, which we started teeing off, which is scenarios, which Mr. Schuster provided. Mr. Schuster, do you want to, with the help of Mr. Kaloje, kind of go through those scenarios which you provided? Well, Mr. Kaloje provided the narrative, but I think you could probably give a recap on that.
Yeah, certainly both myself or Joe can then talk about it. I mean, Joe did all the heavy lifting, but what was requested is that we look at some of these scenarios and where we could, cut back on some expenditures to match revenue. So those were provided in the memo that Joe put together, dated March 5th. Without going into great detail, some of these would have potential staffing impacts and service impacts as we cut back in certain areas. But these are certain, if you want to go the route of making sure that revenues and expenditures are balanced in these areas, these are the paths that could be taken.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. Any questions, just based on everybody's review of the memos that were provided? The memo was provided as well as the attachment. Any questions regarding those two scenarios?
I don't have a question, Mayor. I just wanted to note that, excuse me, in the one scenario, the line item that speaks to, that pertains to the senior social worker at $40,000, I think is a little bit high. I think that was based on if we contracted directly with a provider to hire that person ourselves. The actual number is probably closer to $10,000 or even just $5,000 through a shared service with South Orange for a person, sharing the person that they already have. So I just wanted to, I don't have the exact number, but I don't think it's 40,000. I'm actually sure it's not $40,000.
Okay. And what we did is in that list, we tried to capture all the things that were thrown around at the last couple budget hearings and to provide that in the list to show the budgetary impact. But of course, we can revise it when we get more accurate numbers.
And
thank you, Mr. Daffis. Any other items you want to touch on?
I just want to just make a general statement that as we review this, I know we're not going to make final decisions today, but as we think about our decisions, um, you know, our budget is our values, and absolutely return on investment is important, but that return on investment is not just economical. It's not just making the numbers work, the accounting side of this, but it's also return on investment into our community's health and wellness. This morning, one of our recreational employees posted widely in social media that her father, who suffers from dementia, is missing. He's out and about, and he's trying to be located. A week ago, we had a resident who suffered from a domestic violence incident from their home care provider. Next week, Wednesday night, we're going to have a public safety committee meeting where the data is going to show us from the police department's calls that mental health and substance abuse and self-harm are up in our community, just like they are during these COVID times across the nation. So when we think about services and what we're going to cut and what we're going to do and how we're going to move forward, we have to think about the health and wellness of our community. If we had a social services network like we proposed and adopted to look at, we would have that help to assist in those scenarios where the police department and our first responders tell us that their hands are tied. They can't really help. Our health department was called into these scenarios. They're not qualified to help. So we need the help. We know that this would actually, be a return on investment in our community's health and wellness. So that's all I'm going to say as we, make these tough decisions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daffis. Does anyone want to comment on the memo and the attachment that was provided? And I'm not referring to this to the pool attachment, but just the other two attachments at this point. And then also, I do believe Glenn has something that is more viewable, public viewable versus what we received.
Oh, Joe, that's your impact one, right?
Right, the one I think that's viewable.
Pull that up for you.
Right, thank you. Ms. Adams or Mr. Limbrick or Mr. DeLuca, do you want to comment on your thought process regarding the scenarios of the memo provided? Can't see anybody.
Mr. Mayor, I really don't have any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Limbrick. Ms. Adams?
I don't know which way to go, so.
Okay. Well, what, Mr. DeLuca, sorry.
I do have a couple. So just so because I'm a little unclear, I'm looking at this other budget sheet that you sent out. So our overall evaluations went up roughly $4.9 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which is a good thing because we've been going down or staying steady for a long time.
It would certainly justify the TC's decision to go with the full-time tax assessor instead of a part-time tax assessor. Correct.
Yeah, I think it has more to do with COVID.
That was smooth.
I threw you a softball, huh?
Yeah.
So one thing, this raises one question because I thought on the master sheet, I saw a decrease in the library allocation based on a decrease in valuation. So I didn't understand. It seemed like a contradiction to me. So
there's a 1 year lag on the library. So next year the library will see an increase.
Great. Okay. So I guess and it's on the sheet that's up on the screen here, the driver of the 479,000 that increased PBA and SOA contract. Could you talk a little bit about that? How, because those percentages are not, those increases are not much different than the year before. And we haven't had that year-to-year increase like this.
Yeah, but it's applied to a multi-million-dollar payroll. The impact is a lot greater when you look at it that way. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, retro payments would be rolled into that as well. So you're seeing 2 years worth, not just 1 year.
And we didn't save money in last year's budget for that.
We had money in last year's budget for that, but that was part of what we canceled in December of that was part of the 425,000 that we canceled in order to free up fund balance, or in our particular case, mitigate the operational loss from 2020.
And one quick thing to clarify, because I know we're sharing this sheet and you're here with the public, and so the documents which we received has a different lens of column 21. So what you're looking at there is where we started, more or less, and where we're looking at is not what is reflected right there in terms of based off the working session of 227, just for the record. So I think the question at hand is, the scenarios were, do we continue with the model that we implemented in 2020, where we budget this year as if everything is going to be normalized, and then if that's not the case, then as we did in 2020, we pull it out, there's appropriations out, and we return them, into the fund balance, which was the 425 as noted in the memo. Or do we actually look at the lens of this budget from more of a realistic perspective and reassess the expenses which were outlined, which were rec, building, court, and cultural affairs, and then reassociate the budget with the only quote unquote inherent risk being that, if we do come out of the pandemic, that there are certain gaps that we'll have for this year and this year only. So those are the two strategies that were outlined in the memo that was provided to us with some numbers to associate with them. So I guess that's the question. Just trying to get the pulse of the TC, how they feel about those two scenarios based on your research of the material provided at this point. I'm happy to make the decision myself, but it's a township committee.
So I think I said it last week. I would be in favor of surgically looking at some of these expenses to see what expenses are not going to be incurred because we haven't been providing the services at least January, February, March, probably another 3 months, and that we're not going to make up for that in the balance of the year. For example, jitney drivers.
Right.
Jitney drivers, we know there's no expenses in January, February, March, probably April, May. It's not that we're going to double the jitney from June to December. So that to me can be a cut.
Yeah.
Because our revenue's down. We know that. Same thing as if we're spending $5,000 a month, let's say, for attendance at the Woodland, and we're not spending anything in January, February, March, April, May, we don't have enough time to double all those expenditures from June on. So that's what I asked for last week, and I don't think we've gotten that.
I think, Mr. DeLuca, I think that's a fair point. I agree with your point, and I think there was initial look at that in that document. That's 227 shows. It's more of a generalization that Mr. Schuster and team put together. You see those reductions there. And I do agree with that model. I think that, the quote unquote inherent risk is not a risk. It's more being thoughtful about the tax dollars of our residents. And that even though there's a strong possibility that we are on the other side of this pandemic by the end of the year, we cannot be short-sighted about the expenses that we will be incurring for our fellow residents. And I would agree that we should make some we should make cuts and be more realistic about where we are.
And to the point on the jitney, I think we should also think about the entire year as a potential, not providing that service in 2021 as we monitor how much of the parking is actually being used. There may not be a justification for a few people when they could get a parking space because parking is opened up. So it's really something we might not need to provide for at least 3/4 of the year.
And the jitney is one example, and I agree with that, but also we're talking about cultural fairs. We're talking about a truncated summer program. We're talking about building department activities, truncating those, because even if everyone gets their shot by the end of May or June, that's half the year. So I think being more realistic and creating a more realistic line of expenses and recognizing revenue is my opinion. I'm just going to put out there as the right direction. It's the latter of the two strategies which were provided.
Yeah, I agree with that approach too. We need to be a little bit more surgical here because it's not likely that we will return to some sense of what we enjoyed before until after the summer, until way into the fall.
Right, and even if we do, end of the day, we're dealing with a pandemic, and things just can't snap back to perfect. The bottom line is that we're doing the best we can, just like we had to aggressively ramp down because of the pandemic. We'll have to take our time to ramp back up. So I think it is what it is. We have to be thoughtful and stay in the moment versus saying it's going to be okay. That's a possibility. This is the reality that we're living in. And so therefore, I'm for the latter. And I think we should do a deeper surgical dive, an initial great start done by Mr. Kaloje and Mr. Schuster, and continue to mine down and find what makes sense on this path we're currently on.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with what you said, Mr. DeLuca said, what others have said, that, I think taking our best shot at a realistic view, not being too rosy optimistic about, the speed at which we're going to get back to normal, and also allowing for the fact that, if we have a scenario where we can get back to normal faster than anticipated, that's a good problem to have, for our society generally. Maybe not for our budget in the very short term, but not really, very, very little about this pandemic has gone faster than we expected. I don't think any of us expected a year ago. I now haven't seen my office in over a year, and I thought I was going home for, working from home for 2 weeks, and then I'd be back. So, I think that, betting on this taking longer than we think is, has generally been the safer bet. So but I think we need to be fair to our residents, in terms of some tax fairness here, and not collect money that realistically we know there's a very small % chance we're ever going to need. So I think I'm basically just agreeing and maybe saying it a little differently with everyone, but I think we're all on the same page here, and I think that there's some things that are 0 and some things that are 100, but there's a lot of space in between there, and I think that we can rely on the judgment of our professionals to be reasonable and figure out what it is we're likely to spend and what we're very unlikely to spend, and cut the latter.
Thank you, Mr. Limbick. Agreed. So with that being said, at this point, and this is kind of the recap and recommendations, because there's still more work to do. We're not going to solve it, this morning, but we're providing some direction to Mr. Kaloje and his team, and Mr. Schuster and Mr. Gimes, and Glenn as well. Are there any other thoughts on the memo and the information provided? And if not, at this point, we can, from the agenda, we can actually move to public comment.
Mayor, before we do, if I could just go through a few of the items based on the discussions that you just had.
Please, I will yield the floor. You want to share your screen? I can stop sharing as well.
No, that's okay. But if we can bring up the screen that shows our summary memo, which has the 2 boxes of what we did 2 weeks ago, what we did last week. And obviously part of the reason I'm asking now is so that I know what to do for the 3rd box that we're going to add to that.
Understood.
And then we need to also circle back to the pool before we close today's work
Fair
session.
point. Thank you for reminding me of that.
It would not be this memo, Mayor. It would be the
So
memo
that's
that,
Glenn's
yeah,
driving.
Glenn might be the guy that
I think
has
I
that.
have it, Glenn. I'll share really quick, and if this is not right, then I'll take it down. Just give me 1 second, please. Number 4. Right? Oh, shoot, sorry. Share. Mr. Colodre?
Yes, that's the document. Yes, sir.
Yep, you
So
got it.
we'll,
Okay,
we'll start out because your conversation was regarding the 227 notes that we had. And so, I think Mr. Lembrick explained it pretty well, right? You got 0 to 100 and we're going to wind up somewhere in between. So I think that the only thing that needs to be relevant with that discussion is whatever cuts that we do make in that area, it will, once we pass our cap bank ordinance, it would move that money into our cap bank for use in 2022. But what we need to recognize is, and I happen to agree with the approach that the TC has been discussing, what we're going to wind up with is in 2022, we're going to see those line items spike as we come back to life. And then we're going to draw from our cap bank in order to make sure that we're within a statutory budget. So while the philosophy is very sound, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that, if we cut 50,000 out of recreation, because it's somewhere in between, next year when we come back to life because the pandemic and vaccinations and life's a little bit more normal, we're going to see a spike in that line item of $50,000. So I just don't want anyone to be surprised in 2022 with some actions that we took in 2021. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear on that, because that was one of the things that we tend to focus on when we go through our budgets year by year. And I'm a big fan of multi-year budgeting. So while we can certainly reduce this year because it's a service that's not being provided, like Ms. Adams said, the jitney may be ripe for more than just half a year, which is what we have in the first box from the first session. Those are all items that come 2022, we're going to see a significant increase in our budget for that. We'll have it in the cap bank to be able to afford to do it, but I don't want anyone to kind of think that somehow magically we've been able to suppress the appropriations that we've had going for the last few years.
And if I could just add,
oh, go ahead, Mr. Schuster, sorry.
Sorry, if I could just add something to that, direction you're going is fine. No issues with it. We just want to make sure your eyes are open to what's going to happen in 2022, and that's also coupled with the fact that by taking out that emergency note, you're going to be putting additional pressure on 2022 and beyond. So just want to make sure everyone is aware of that by solving some of the problems in 21, you're not really solving them, you're pushing them off to 2022 and beyond. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, just be aware of it.
No, duly noted. And there's a couple of things too, is that as we mentioned earlier, we may have $4.6 million to play with. Let's not forget that. So that offsets a lot of this, that is something that we have as an option too. And you said that will be in our balance. So we have, end of the day, and we've talked about not kicking the can down the road, and we're not, in terms of, you look at the capital we've agreed upon to do this year, I think, which is significant. It helps infrastructure. But we cannot be, as everyone's already articulated, we have to be thoughtful about our residents in the moment that they deal with COVID and how we're operating. And so we have to move forward with this process.
I absolutely agree. I think that in 2022, if we see increases in expenses, we're also going to see some increases in revenue. If we're cutting the revenue stream for jitneys, we're going to see that go back up as the expenses were. And, kicking the can down the road, I don't think anybody's doing it. I think we're trying to put the lid on the can here. This is an extraordinary tax increase, and people are stressed right now. And I think we're trying to maintain municipal services, but this is really, really above and beyond what we can tolerate.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think we're all fans of multi-year budgeting, but I don't think multi-year budgeting considers a pandemic that we've experienced. So I think we need to be mindful of that and, see what services are absolutely necessary that we fund with the general budget. The jitney as an example again, that's funded by, but it's also supplemented by the general budget. And, these are the kinds of conversations that maybe we have now. Maybe we raised those fees a few years ago so that a larger burden is on the user, and maybe we need to think about that in other areas as well and look to where we might need to, supplement a little less on certain items with the general fund and increase user fees. But I think we're all cognizant that when we see a bump next year, we all know why. We're all stuck in our houses for a reason. So,
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, I'll keep it brief because I think this is a situation where everything's been said, but not everyone has said it. So I'll just agree with my colleagues, basically with everything that's been said so far. I think that we obviously have a long-term obligation to the town to make sure that we're not setting ourselves, we're not trading a little temporary comfort for a lot of long-term pain, but I really don't think that's what we're doing here. I think, we have to get through this year, as Mr. DeLuca said, and others, this is a tough time. We have to also look beyond just our budget and just look at the overall economy, look at what's happening to people in our towns. And I think that to the extent that we can keep a tax increase to a minimum by making, reasonable decisions, I think, it's really our duty to do that. We'll deal, or I guess, I shouldn't say you'll deal with next year. But I don't think that, I don't think that we're really borrowing from our future, for a more comfortable present with, with the kind of budget priorities that we're talking about here. So I'm in agreement with what's been said so far, and we'll vote accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. So that being said, I think Mr. Kaloji, Mr. Schuster, Mr. Johns, I think we're at a point where, we made some, given some direction here, and we'll continue these conversations, at Township Committee meeting as well as in the Finance Committee meeting over the next couple of months. So I'm going to, if there's anything else, I'm going to move on to the pool budget as you requested, Mr. Kaloji. So the pool budget is open, and I'll yield the floor to you or to Mr. Schuster.
So very quickly on the pool budget, it is a utility, so we are similar to municipality. We're required to present a balanced budget in order to move forward. You can see from our revenue line at the very, very top, we are recommending that we take advantage of Chapter 74 and utilize the average of the prior 3 years. Otherwise, we would wind up going into a pool with a budget of actual realized revenue that was $310,000, and we've got $360,000 worth of debt service, so that's not going to work. The only reason I'm bringing this slide up at this point is if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we will see that right now the pool budget is not balanced. It's almost $19,000 over what our revenue would be. We will obviously adjust the budget accordingly, but I wanted to bring it to the attention of the TC because it may be time to consider adjusting the registration or fee schedules that we have on this particular utility in order to get it back to balanced. The truth is that once they start paying for the $1.9 million note that we have out, which will eventually get converted into a bond to do the filtration system at the pool, it is going to become very, very difficult to see the pool utility be self-liquidating over the next several years. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. And obviously, when we come to the point of introducing a budget, we will have this pool utility budget balanced so that it can be statutorily introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Kaloji. I think with that information in hand, I would obviously yield to my colleague, Mr. Limbrick, who is our liaison and the appropriate authority with the pool to take a deeper dive and maybe come back to us on the 16th. To
scroll up. Frank, could you scroll up toward the top?
Sure, no worries. Sorry, thanks, Nancy. To take a look and kind of assess at this point.
Yeah, I can do that, and I can work with Ms. Mancuso on that and her team. But I think it also it may be worth having the pool advisory committee take a look at this. Not necessarily the line items, but sort of the overall situation. Both for ideas that they might have, and also to consider it, sort of more broadly, because I think, there can be a difference of opinion on this, but I think in some cases, some of the things they're planning to do are sort of would be in the right direction on this, and some things that they're thinking about doing might sort of be precluded by this deficit. So that's something that they'll need to keep in mind. So, and I may ask, particularly given the meeting is virtual, to find if Mr. Cologe may be able to join the next pool committee meeting, and I can get in the date for that. To maybe walk through some of this. So, because there are some people on that committee who are sophisticated about numbers and will want to dig into this. And I think to have the person there that really knows the numbers versus me as a middleman would be helpful.
I agree.
I have a question for Mr. Cologe. Is the current bidding out the employment practice, the employees, is there any cost difference to us if we're outsourcing, who's in charge of employee management, as we're talking about doing?
So the hope would be to bid out the outsourcing is essentially bidding out what we're looking at in salary and wages at this point. The goal obviously would be that the outsource winds up saving us money. And so instead of having to budget $514,000 in order to cover our salary and wages, we're budgeting something less, and that would certainly fix our revenue deficit. Yes.
Okay, good. When do we know that answer to that?
I'm not sure when it's going out to bid, but I would hope soon, because the bidding process is.
I feel like it's already out to bid. Greg?
It's already out? Okay, so then I'll find out on Monday when the bid opening is, and then we'll know.
Yeah, I believe it is out to bid, but obviously it hasn't closed yet. So, but yeah, we should know that soon. And everything that I've heard, both theoretically and also in talking to people from other towns who've gone to this model, has been that if they didn't save money, they at least broke even versus what they were doing before. There really shouldn't be a cost to this to us, and if anything, there's sort of a marginal gain, even if we break even, in that it frees up some of our personnel who would otherwise be spending an inordinate amount of time on this to spend less time on.
Right.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Adams, Mr. Cologe, Mr. We'll look forward to hearing back from you.
On that point, Mayor, the last meeting, I'm sorry.
You're breaking up. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The last meeting I was in, and Mr. Schuster, you can clarify if anything's changed, but I believe Missy was still finalizing the RFP because there was some language she wanted to include, and we met with Roger last week. So to my knowledge, it has not been advertised yet.
So we should, to that point, Mr. Shanowski, we should follow up and, via email, and just let the TC know where we are with that then. Any additional questions at this point? I think we have some direction regarding the pool budget. Any final remarks on the pool budget? All right, seeing none, hearing none. All right, we're now at public comment. So at this point, we have 3 attendees. Would anyone like to address the Township Committee at this time? Please raise your hand. Going once.
I think there was a question in the chat, but I don't think he's still here anymore.
Okay.
But I mean, in the Q&A,
I didn't see that.
but it's mostly about schools, and we.
Yeah, we can't really.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly trying to increase taxes as little as possible, and that's really, I think, what a lot of the discussion has been, maybe since he signed off and since that question popped up, has actually been what are the strategies going to be to avoid that tax increase, or at least keep it minimized? And obviously, you know, the school issue, I mean, that's not even mixing apples and oranges. I mean, that's mixing apples and watermelons. I mean, there's really no relation of one to the other. You know, schools not being open, you know, is not one of the things that's really saved us money, particularly because, you know, we've still had to provide crossing guards and a lot of the expenses, township expenses that are related to schools, we've still had because, you know, there are still students going in, you know, even when it's limited. You know, the schools are open for lunches for people on free and reduced lunch. So, you know, we really haven't seen that, you know, from a municipal standpoint, we really don't save money. So, you know, those two things really aren't related. So I realize that gentleman's no longer here, but I think that answers the question.
I think it does as well. Thank you, Mr. Lindbergh. Well done. Okay, so now I will now close public comment. At this point, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Saturday.